So the recipe tells you first to preheat the oven and then to measure specific ingredients into one bowl. If you keep reading, it later tells you to do something with other ingredients in another bowl. So this is one of the reasons why it's really helpful to read the steps all the way through first. You need to get in the habit when you look at a recipe of not just looking at the list of ingredients. So we're going to start with the ingredients that it says to put into one bowl. And the first one is the flour. Our recipe called for 2 1/4 cups of flour. So we have 2 different types of measuring cups. We have these ones and these ones. So this one is a liquid measuring cup. It's clear, so you can see through and see the level of the liquid inside. It has lines denoting different measurements, so you can add the liquid only to the amount that you need. It has a spout to make it easier to pour the liquid into a container without spilling. So if we were measuring milk, juice, water, oil, any other liquid, we would put the liquid measuring cup on a flat surface and we would look at it at eye level as we pour the liquid in, and we want it to just touch the bottom of the bubble of liquid is going to touch the line for the measurement that we want. We don't have enough volume of liquid for anything in this recipe to justify using a liquid measuring cup, but that's the one we would use if we were measuring a liquid. And so for your lab grade, what I'm looking for is using the correct tool for the task and demonstrating correct techniques. So I want to see that you're using a liquid measuring cup when you're measuring liquids, and then these measuring cups are for measuring solid or dry ingredients. So we're measuring flour to start with. Is this liquid, dry, or solid? It's dry. So for measuring dry ingredients, we scoop or spoon the ingredient into the measuring cup, and then we level it off. We don't shake it or pack it down because we don't want to compress the ingredients. That would make our measurements be off. If you were scooping the ingredients, you would just do it like that. And then this is a spatula. I know this is not what you probably call a spatula. The thing you call a spatula is not a spatula, even though everyone uses that term. To level it off, we use anything with a straight edge. The back of a knife, the spatula in general, this is what this is intended for. So we're going to put this in our separate bowl. If we couldn't fit the measuring cup in here, because some of the other canisters have a smaller mouth, we could scoop it instead. But like I said, we don't want to pack it, we don't want to shake it, and we level it off. We use the exact cup so that we're not trying to just fill it to like a partial line or something. We need to be able to fill it all the way and level it off to measure it correctly. So that's 2 cups. We use the 1 cup twice, and then the 4th cup is this one. Okay. You might have noticed that I was working on this piece of wax paper, and I do that so I don't have to worry about making a mess, because I can just put the extra back in here. We have the flour in our bowl. Next we need the baking soda. There are 2 ingredients in the cupboard that look similar, baking powder and baking soda. They're both white powders, and they both are leaveners, which means they help make things rise. These are not the same, so you can't use them interchangeably. You need to pay attention to the recipe of which one you actually need. Baking soda is bicarbonate soda just by itself. It won't really do anything unless it's activated with another ingredient, something like cream of tartar, which is another white powder substance. Anything acidic like vinegar, buttermilk, sour cream, yogurt, lemon juice, anything like that could activate your leavener. That means that the oven is now preheated. This one, the baking powder, has baking soda in it, but it also already has the cream of tartar, another activator. So as soon as water or any liquid is added to this, it starts to react. This one needs another ingredient to make it react. So our recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Is baking soda going to be a liquid ingredient, a dry ingredient, or a solid ingredient? It's dry. It's a white powder substance, definitely dry. So again, we're going to scoop and level with baking soda and also baking powder, because you can see there's a little lip on the jar, and this has a lip in the box. It makes it a lot easier to measure. You don't have to scoop and level outside of the box. You can just scoop and level right on the lip of the box itself. So we're using an exact measurement, 1 teaspoon measuring spoon. We scraped and leveled it, so that's the right amount. We want to make sure that we're double checking and triple checking that when we're using the spoon, we're using the teaspoon for the teaspoon and the tablespoon for the tablespoon. Definitely have had times where people have used a tablespoon for something like baking soda or salt, which means it's 3 times as much. So it might make it really bitter or really salty. Obviously, either way, not very tasty. And then the salt, we also need 1 teaspoon. A small amount just brings out other flavors, but obviously too much is not a good thing. So I usually go just a little less with the salt. That way there's no chance of too much. And you notice I try not to measure anything right over the bowl. That way we don't have the risk of putting too much in. So it says to stir together the flour, the baking soda, and the salt. And so we're just going to combine them enough that we don't have any pockets of baking soda or salt, so that when we make the cookies, you bite into one and you get this really bitter bite or this really salty bite. So that's just a small amount of mixing. The recipe directions tell us in a separate bowl to start combining some other ingredients. So we want to make sure that we're following that direction and we have a different bowl. This one with this base on it are the ones that are specifically made to go in our stand mixers. They lock in with this bottom here. So if you're planning to use the mixer, make sure you have the right bowl. In this bowl, it tells us to put a cup of butter, our granulated sugar, our brown sugar, and our vanilla in this bowl and beat them together. So first we need the butter. It calls for 1 cup. How many sticks is that? 2, yep, because we said there's 16 tablespoons in a cup, 8 tablespoons in 1 stick of butter, so we need 2 sticks. Typically, for you guys, we need to follow the recipes exactly how they're written, unless we know for sure that something is an acceptable substitute. I'm gonna go off book already here, because one of the things that I've learned when making cookies is that depending on the type of fat you use, it influences how the cookies turn out. If you use all butter, it has a lot of flavor, because butter has flavor, but it melts very quickly, and so your cookies will tend to come out more flat and soft. If you use shortening instead of butter, and you can buy butter flavored shortening so you still get that flavor of butter. If you use all shortening, your cookies will be more crispy, like a crunchier cookie, and they tend to stay higher, thicker, because the shortening doesn't melt as quickly in the oven. So what I like to do is use half and half. Then you get the flavor from the butter, but you keep a little bit of the height of your cookies so they're not little flat pancakes. So we're just gonna do half a cup of butter and then half a cup of shortening. It will give me an opportunity to demonstrate measuring a solid, because we don't have to measure this. We know it's 8 tablespoons, we know it's half a cup. We can just unwrap it and put it in there. For the other half cup, we're gonna use our shortening. So this is considered a solid ingredient. Some other ingredients that are measured as solids: peanut butter, cream cheese, but anything that has this type of consistency where you can't really scoop it and it's not dry, but you can't really pour it, so it's not a liquid. So we're gonna take a half cup measuring cup, and again, these are used for dry and solid ingredients. We're gonna pack the measuring cup full because we wanna make sure we have an exact amount, so no air pockets inside or anything like that. So we pack it in and then we level it off. Okay, so we leveled it. We're gonna scrape it into the bowl. You could do that with a spoon, with a butter knife, but a rubber scraper works really well for scraping everything out of the measuring cup. And also works really well for scraping down the bowl once you start mixing. So we'll hang on to it when we're done. Okay, so we've got our half cup of butter and our half cup of shortening, so we have 1 cup total. And then we need to add 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. This white sugar, the granulated sugar, would you call this a liquid, a solid, or a dry? Yeah, this is a dry ingredient. We need to measure 3/4 of a cup. I don't have a 3/4 cup measuring cup. We're gonna do 2 separate measurements. What 2 measurements would add up to 3/4? Yep, 1/2 and 1/4. A lot of times people will suggest we just use the 1/4 cup and do it 3 times. Mathematically, that's right. But accurately, we want to try to avoid that. I mean, if we're measuring a cup of something, technically we could scoop a tablespoon 16 times. But the chances of losing count or having a little too much or not quite enough each time out of the 16, so that by the time you're done you're way off, there's a pretty high chance of that. So it's a lot more accurate to use the 1 cup measuring cup. So instead of doing the 1/4 3 times, we're going to use the half cup and the 1/4 cup, because we never had a 3/4 cup to begin with. A set of measuring cups has a 1 cup, a half cup, a 1/3 cup, and a 1/4 cup. So we have to work within those options. We've got scoop and level 1/2 cup, and the same with the 1/4 cup. Is this a liquid ingredient, a dry, or a solid? Yeah, this is a solid ingredient. It doesn't seem like it would be. You might think it's a dry ingredient. But whenever you measure brown sugar in a recipe, it's almost always going to tell you to pack the brown sugar. And that's what makes it a solid. We don't want air pockets. We want as much as we can fit into the measuring cup, just like we did with the shortening. So you just scoop it and you pack it with clean hands that I just washed. And then you level it off, and you'll know that you did this accurately if it will hold together, and you can see there's no big air pockets or spaces, so we know we have a full 1/4 cup there. And the same thing with the 1/2 cup. Okay, so we have our butter, shortening, white sugar, brown sugar. Now we need to beat this. Instead of beat, it will say cream together. That's just another way of saying to beat something until it's as light and fluffy as whipped cream. But anytime that you see in a recipe to beat something or mix on high speed or cream together, these things are all going to require whip, same thing. These things would all require the mixer. If it says stir, and a lot of times if it says combine, it just means just do it with a spoon. We don't use the whisk for mixing. People try to do it all the time. It's really not effective, and everything gets stuck in it, and you spend all your time just trying to clean the whisk out. So we're going to turn the mixer on to a fairly high speed, and we're going to beat those ingredients together until they're light and fluffy. They'll actually change color. You'll see it get lighter and lighter the longer you let it mix. Once you add flour to anything, you want to go easy on how much you mix it. We're going to talk more about this, but flour contains gluten. Gluten is a protein that gives baked goods their structure. Without gluten, things would be tough and spongy and dense. Once we add flour, we don't want to overmix, because if we mix the gluten too much, what we make will turn out tough. But we have no flour in there right now. It's just sugar and butter. So I'm just going to turn this on and let it do its thing while we measure our vanilla and our eggs that we're supposed to add to this. So is this a liquid, a solid, or a dry ingredient? Yeah, it's a liquid. Yeah, right? So we need to measure this by pouring theoretically at eye level. It's kind of hard to do with small amounts because you don't have your whole measuring cup there. So we're just using the 1 teaspoon and the 1/2 teaspoon. And I'm going to do this over a container so that if I spill, it's not going to go everywhere. And if I spill a lot, I could put it right back in the bottle if I wanted. And I'm going to add this. So 1 teaspoon, 1/2 teaspoon. Then we need to add our eggs. When you're cracking eggs, I want you to do it in a separate container. And the reason for this would be if you get shell in it, makes it easier to pick it out. The shell's not getting ground into whatever you're making. Every now and then you'll get an egg with a bloody yolk. So it's not common, but it does happen. And it's certainly not something you want to put in your food. So you're going to crack them one at a time into a separate container before you add them. And that way, if it's a bad egg, if you get shells in it, whatever, you haven't ruined your whole recipe. So everything that needs to go in that bowl is in there. And then it tells us to gradually add the dry ingredients that we stirred together earlier. So I'm going to turn the mixer back down to low. I'm going to just shake this in slowly so it doesn't poof up everywhere. And as soon as I don't see any flour that's not mixed in, I'm going to turn the mixer off. Because like I said before, I don't want to overmix once I've put flour in there because it contains gluten and I don't want the cookies to be tough little hockey pucks. Okay, need to scrape that down again. And cookie dough does make a pretty thick dough, which is another reason why it's helpful to use the stand mixer. But if you're doing a lab on your remote day, have a stand mixer at home, you can use a hand mixer. You could technically do it by hand, it's just gonna be a lot of work and take you a long time. Okay, and the last ingredient that we're gonna put in is the chocolate chips. And we've done that lots and lots. So these are a drop cookie, which we'll talk more about when we start the unit. But that just basically means that you scoop it up and then you scrape it onto the pan before you bake it.